The letter arrives 27 years after Grandfather Francesco's death. Maria finds it tucked inside an old cookbook while helping her mother clean out the attic. The envelope yellowed with age, her name written in Francesco's careful cursive, for Maria when she needs to remember who she is. She had forgotten he used to call her that, not by her childhood nickname, but by the woman he somehow knew she would become. Inside 8 pages written when she was 7 and wanted to be a ballerina. You don't know yet that you will become a doctor, that you will save children's lives, that you will carry forward the healing that has been passed down through our family for generations. But I know. How could he have known? How do words written in one century find their purpose in another? This is the mystery of legacy. Truth that transcends time, wisdom that waits patiently for the moment when it's needed most. In 2 Timothy, Paul writes to his young protege, "I am reminded of your sincere faith, which first lived in your grandmother Lois and in your mother, Eunice, and I am persuaded now lives in you also." This is more than genealogy. Paul is describing something the Hebrew tradition calls zekut avot, the merit of the fathers. The understanding that faith isn't just individually generated, but transmitted through generations, carried forward like a torch passed from runner to runner. Lois to Eunice to Timothy. Not just biological succession, but spiritual inheritance. The faith that lived in the grandmother creates conditions for faith to live in the mother, which prepares the way for faith to live in the child. This is legacy as lived reality, not merely transmitted doctrine. Francesco's letter tells stories Maria had never heard, about her great-grandmother Rosa, unofficial midwife in their Sicilian village, delivering babies and hope in equal measure. About his own father, who lost his medical practice during the war, but continued treating patients in secret, risking his life to save others. Healing is not a career we chose, Francesco writes. It is a calling that chose us. This echoes the biblical concept of generational calling, the way God's purposes unfold not just in individual lives but across family lines. Abraham called to father a nation, Isaac receiving that covenant, Jacob wrestling it into his own identity, Joseph preserving it through famine. The calling doesn't belong to any single generation. It flows through them, shaped by each while transcending all. What began with Abraham finds fulfillment centuries later in Christ, who identifies himself as the seed of Abraham through whom all nations are blessed. Legacy isn't what we leave behind, it's what continues to live and grow and bear fruit long after we're gone. Maria is crying now, remembering the crisis that nearly broke her 2 years ago. The 8-year-old patient who died despite everything she'd done. The lawsuit that followed. The months when she couldn't enter the hospital without panic attacks. She'd felt alone in that darkness, convinced her struggles meant she wasn't cut out for the work she'd thought was her calling. But Francesco's letter speaks directly to that crisis. You will lose patience, cara mia. Not because you are not good enough, but because healing has limits and death has its own timing. Your job is not to be God. It is to be God's hands. The measure of a healer is not how many people you save, but how you love the ones you cannot save. This is the wisdom of Ecclesiastes speaking across time. There is a time for everything and a season for every activity under the heavens. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to uproot. A time to kill and a time to heal. The preacher understands something we resist, that we're not sovereign over outcomes. We're participants in rhythms larger than ourselves. Our calling isn't to control life and death, but to serve faithfully within the boundaries of our humanity. Francesco somehow knew Maria would need this reminder, that she would face moments when her medical competence crashed against the limits of mortal existence, that she would need permission to be human rather than divine. Permission written decades before the crisis, waiting for precisely this moment. The final pages describe legacy not as achievements carved on tombstones, but as love that outlives its source. I will not live to see you graduate medical school, but I will be there in every gentle touch you offer a frightened child, in every family you comfort in their darkest hour. This is how love transcends death, not by living forever, but by living on in the hands and hearts of those who carry it forward. This reflects the Hebrew concept of olam, eternity not as endless time, but as that which transcends time. The eternal breaking into the temporal, the infinite expressing itself through the finite. God's purposes continuing through human generations. In this sense, Francesco hasn't died. He lives in Maria's hands as she examines patients, lives in her voice as she comforts frightened families, lives in her courage to continue healing even after devastating loss. Death couldn't contain what he gave because what he gave wasn't merely biological, it was vocational, spiritual, eternal. 3 months later, Maria's daughter Elena starts her pediatric oncology residency. She doesn't know yet about Francesco's letter, about the legacy of healing flowing through her DNA, about the great-great-grandfather who saw her calling before she was born. But Maria is writing her own letter now. 8 pages in both English and Spanish, filled with wisdom earned through 2 decades of practicing medicine with Francesco's words echoing in her heart. When Elena calls 6 months later, devastated by her first patient loss, Maria doesn't just offer comfort. She shares Francesco's letter. And Elena weeps not just for her patient, but for the realization that she's part of something larger than herself. That her calling isn't solitary but communal, not unprecedented but inherited, not hers alone but held in trust for the next generation. In Hebrews 11, the author describes the faithful who did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance, admitting that they were foreigners and strangers on earth. Abraham never saw the nation his descendants would become. Moses never entered the promised land. David never saw the temple built. But their faithfulness created conditions for fulfillment beyond their lifetimes. This is the scandal of biblical time, that God's purposes unfold across generations, requiring each person to plant trees whose shade they'll never enjoy, to labor for harvests they'll never reap, to pass torches they won't carry to the finish line. to trust that their small obedience participates in something eternal. Tonight, maybe you're feeling disconnected from your own legacy. Maybe you've forgotten the voices that shaped you, the hands that held you, the love that called you into being. Maybe you think you're writing your story alone, that your struggles are unprecedented, that no one before you has faced what you're facing. But you're part of a conversation that began long before you were born and will continue long after you're gone. You carry voices that shaped your voice, hands that guided your hands, hearts that formed your heart. You're connected to a legacy of love that stretches backward and forward through time, binding generations in purposes larger than any single life. And somewhere, someone is waiting for the letter you're writing with your life, waiting for the wisdom only your struggles can produce, waiting for permission to continue that only your faithfulness can provide. The question isn't whether your words will outlive you. The question is what love you're passing forward.